Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be with you, and I'm really grateful for the opportunity to push some of these ideas into Europe, because what I'm talking to you about is very well known in Australia, America, Canada, Mexico, large chunks of Africa, but we have had great difficulty getting this sort of thinking into Europe. So it's a pleasure to have this opportunity. We've had a major shift in worldview long ago, from a flat world to a round world. It took us a few hundred years to make that shift. We are in the beginning of the second major shift in worldview, from a reductionist worldview, a linear worldview, to a holistic worldview. And when we look at these two worldviews, in the reductionist one, we have three, and this is the mainstream worldview still, we have three separate, very serious issues: biodiversity loss, desertification, and climate change. And millions of dollars and many, many good people are working on these three separate issues. If we look at this from a holistic point of view, we see one issue: environmental malfunctioning. These are one issue. They are not three separate issues. And they're very old. Those of you that saw Al Gore's film, An Inconvenient Truth, will remember his hockey stick graphs showing the carbon in the atmosphere just shooting up and up and up. Well, frankly, if we had fitted a graph of the rate of acceleration in biodiversity loss to that, it would have been the same. If we'd fitted the rate of acceleration of desertification in the world, it would have been the same curve. Why are all three the same curve? Simply because they're the same issue. They're indivisible. Without biodiversity loss, you don't get desertification. It doesn't occur. Desertification is a symptom of the loss of biodiversity. Plant cover, litter cover on the soil. As simple as that. If you get bare ground forming, it changes the microclimate. By the time bare ground is the size of the Sahara, or the big deserts of Australia and so on, it's changing macroclimate. What I'm saying to you is, if we'd never discovered fossil fuels, we still would have been facing climate change brought about by humans. There is no debate, or there should be no debate, of whether or not climate change is occurring. It's already destroyed more than 20 civilizations. There's just mass ignorance that we're dealing with because of our reductionist point of view. We essentially, I believe, need a very simple two-pronged strategy if we're going to realistically face the future. One is a high-tech route, and it's beyond my comprehension, it's beyond my little brain. We're going to need high technology to find benign forms of energy that can be readily transported, supplied on the scale we need for cities today, etc. And the only way to do that is through high-level technology, high-tech route. Now, on the other hand, we need a low-tech route to store the legacy carbon, future carbon in the soil and water because of desertification. It's the same issue, okay, in our grasslands, our forests, our croplands, and oceans. Now, there are people pushing high-tech solutions for this low-tech route. It is highly dangerous to take the high-tech road for that, assuming we could lock up enormous amounts of carbon in salt deposits or something in the soil. How do you guarantee against volcanic eruptions? How do you guarantee about that not being released at some point down the line? It's just way too dangerous and completely unnecessary. Now let me go from here into talking about this low-tech route that I've been working on indirectly for the last 50 years from the desertification aspect. I want to look first at the symptoms of environmental malfunction. These are well known after many civilizations have already failed. Eroding soil, that's a symptom. The drying up of wells, springs, rivers, and lakes. the increasing frequency of droughts and floods, severity and frequency, increasing diseases in plants, animals, humans, invasions of noxious weeds, insects, etc., poverty, social breakdown, abuse of women and children, drift of people to cities and slums, rising petty crime, violence, blaming minorities, victimization, genocide, failing economies, first local level, then national level, then global level, wars, the breakdown of governments, and the failure of civilizations. And we've just repeated this pattern over and over again. Civilization is city-based by definition, and the only place where we've maintained civilization for a long time is Lower Egypt. And what did it take to maintain that? It took the destruction of Ethiopia and the silt coming down the Nile every year. And in the mid-reaches of the Nile, we couldn't maintain civilizations. Other than that, we've maintained them for a short time, major rivers, seashores. What did it take to maintain London? Australia, most of Canada, America, much of Africa, merchant navy, Royal Navy, enormous resources to maintain it for a short time on a seashore or river. Then we get change of climate, micro, going to macro. Now, all of these symptoms that I've mentioned here, I think you'll acknowledge, are treated by our governments, our environmental organizations, our universities as problems. If I'm beating you on the head and you get a headache, please believe me, your headache is not a problem. I am the problem. All you've got to do is stop me beating you on the head. You don't need to take Tylenol and aspirin and more things because you'll start suffering side effects. We don't use that simple common sense when it comes to all these issues that we treat as problems. Are you aware of us solving any of these in the world? No. Globally, they're getting worse. Why? Because we're not treating them for what they are, symptoms of environmental degradation. So if we've got environmental degradation on this scale that you see here in northern Kenya, southern Ethiopia, where we're working, it is an enormous issue to deal with. And if we were successful in stopping all fossil fuel usage tomorrow, 100% stopping it, we're still deeply in trouble. Why? Because desertification, biodiversity loss, has got nothing to do with fossil fuel. This was occurring thousands of years and destroying civilizations before we discovered coal and oil. So what we need to look at, if we're going to be serious about global climate change, is what is causing this massive environmental malfunction that we have been witnessing for so long. If we take the mainstream view, the list of things on the left are what are blamed mostly in Africa. And it's easier to look at Africa than to look at ourselves. Now, these are taken from consultants' reports, international agencies, environmental organizations, church organizations, every source we can. And the three top things are the most blamed: overpopulation, overstocking and overgrazing with livestock, the tragedy of the commons, the communal tenure of land, they can't get access to capital, and so on and so forth. We have such total certainty that these things are causing the degradation that if I was to seek research money to research this, who would fund it? Nobody. I just remind you, we were once equally certain that the world was flat. This is another such situation. What we had to do was say, let's see if the experiment hasn't been done for us, because nobody will fund researching this. So we looked for a place with a similar climate, low and erratic rainfall, etc., West Texas. And let's have a look at the conditions there. In West Texas, we have a very low and falling population, the opposite of what we're blaming in Africa. In West Texas, there are almost no animals left on the land. You can travel 300 miles through West Texas on road, and I know because I do it many times, and you average 30 to 50 head of cattle, you'll see. There are thousands of cattle in feedlots, nothing on the land. They've been destocking for over 100 years, 1.5 animal units per section per year, regardless of weather, regardless of technology. just going down, down, down. Okay, so we have the opposites. The reason I pick on Texas is because it's a private land state. I don't pick on Arizona or New Mexico because there's a lot of public land. But Texas is a private land state. They're fiercely proud of their land. They love their land. They don't abuse it. So we have opposite to the tragedy of the commons. They have great wealth, easy access to capital, good universities and education, excellent, well-funded, staffed extension services. Frankly, we have complete opposite practices here. Therefore, if we are right, the environmentalists of the world, the scientists of the world, if we're right about the things on the left, if you go to Texas, you should find abundance, streams flowing, very little soil erosion, thriving communities, etc. I don't know how many of you travel there. I flew in my plane to Austin to talk to the lands department in the capital of Texas, and as I walked through the airport, I picked up the newspaper, and this was the heading right across the page. Ghost towns proliferate. They're all over Texas. There is nobody left in them. Totally deserted towns, gone to city slums. I put the plane on autopilot at about 7,000 feet, and for about 45 minutes I was just photographing sand dunes. This is not Africa. This is the United States. There are more people now in jail than are left on farms. And yet we get all this propaganda from America, and they're out advising us what to do in Africa. Who are the experts? Who does understand this problem? I jokingly like to say we scientists got the bull by the udder on this one. Let's look at further evidence of our ignorance. We're going to look at a picture here. On one side is everything we condemn. Overstocking, overgrazing, ignorance, tragedy of the commons. On the other side, we have a national park, wilderness area, no livestock. Hundreds of thousands of dollars have been spent on soil conservation measures. We've had these totally different treatments for 70 years. So on the other side of the fence, we're going to look at the best of management that the Western world knows how. And we'll look at how different they are after 70 years. What does this tell us about our certain knowledge? What are we going to do to reverse desertification and address climate change? For your interest, the right side is the national park. All right, so we come back to this situation, and if we're going to understand what is causing this massive global environmental degradation that we're seeing, we've got to look for a common denominator. There has to be something that is being done in Africa, being done in the United States, being done in Ireland, was done by the Romans, the Hohokams, the Charcoans, the biblical civilizations, something we've all been doing that was common to every situation. If we can find that common denominator, then my logic tells me that's likely to be what's causing the problem. Because it sure as hell isn't livestock or overpopulation or any of these things we've been blaming. So we look for a common denominator, and we can list a lot of things it's not. Livestock is blamed by many people, as you know. Well, the Hohokams and the Charcoan civilizations were irrigation-based, and they failed a couple of hundred years before livestock got to America with the Spaniards. So we couldn't blame the livestock. They didn't have them. It's not fire, not economics, not cultural factors, and we can go on with what it's not. There is one common denominator. What do you think it might be? People. Deforestation. But grasslands don't get deforested. It's got to be every situation. There is one common denominator we can find, and that's in every case, humans made the decision that led to the degradation. There's where the problem lies. It's the only common denominator we can find. So that then poses the question, well, how do humans make decisions if there's something that we're doing that is causing this, do we make decisions in lots of different ways, collaboratively, scientifically, etc., or is there a chance that all humans, through all ages, make decisions exactly the same way? Which do you think it might be? Frankly, I thought it was the top one. And the greatest aha of my life was when I suddenly realized, oh my goodness, humans make decisions exactly the same way. It's like we have wonderful computers, our heads, our brains, but we're all using exactly the same software, and there are a couple of glitches in the software. That's where the problem lay. So let's look at this. There are many schools of decision-making, sophisticated decision-making. Some of these are business schools, universities, military, of course, that get into them. But if we peel the onion to its core and look at the decision-making, and just keep peeling the onion till you get to the core of it, we always find a universal framework common to all humans, ages, etc. From the household to the scientific team, from a pastoralist family to government policy makers, you and me, and incidentally, all tool-using animals. So whether we look at a vulture or an otter or an ape, makes decisions exactly the same way as a human. So it was a tool-using animal framework that we had, and we didn't know about it because it was so simple. It was below our radar. Let's see if you agree with me. All conscious decisions, I'm not talking about an unconscious one. If my hand touches the hot stove, I don't say, wow, that's hot, what's my objective? I just pull my hand away. If a mother sees her baby fall into water, she just leaps in. I'm talking about every conscious decision, to buy toothpaste, come to this talk, buy a car, get your education, whatever. Every conscious decision is made towards an objective or a goal. And through that, a mission or a vision. The problem begins right there. That is linear, and the world isn't linear. The world is complex. So the problem, there's a glitch right there that we see. And then the next thing is we've got various tools we use. We'll return to that. And then we always make our decision on one or more of many factors. So I can have the objective of buying a glass. How do I make the decision? I'm going to use money. Well, friends' advice. I bought those, they broke. These were tough, these were good. Advertising, cash flow, cost effectiveness, research results, you name it. Intuition, political compromise, expediency, fear, whatever. And through one or more of many factors, we'll make the decision, and almost always we achieve the objective. I buy the glass, or whatever it is, okay? And then we have unexpected results later because the world is complex. And there are whole books you are aware of that have been written about the unintended consequences of our decisions, etc. All right, so as we look at this framework now, I think you can all recognize it in your lives. Every one of us uses it. We always have, okay, from the earliest days. Now, let us go into seeing why this might be causing the problem, despite all our good intentions and everything else. I mentioned that there's a glitch at the top. We needed something that would focus our decision-making on complexity. To make an economically sound decision, if it's not socially sound, you'll live to regret it at some point. But if you're going to make a socially sound decision, if it's not environmentally sound, you'll live to regret it at some point. So in every household, in every economy, in everyday actions, we need to be making decisions that are socially, environmentally, and economically sound, short and long term. The human mind can't do it. How many of you can count bicycles coming through the gate? All of you? How many of you can count bicycles and motorbikes coming through the gate? We begin to drop out. How many of you can count bicycles, motorbikes, and cars coming through the gate at the same time? Hold up your hands, the liars. Now that's just 3 variables in one dimension, and most of us drop out. All right, so we needed something beyond a vision, a mission, something that would tie our deepest material and spiritual values to our life support system. And we didn't know what that was. That was the hardest thing to discover, and we finally got it in 1984. A holistic goal, we had to give it a new word for it because it was a new concept. It wasn't in any branch of science. It wasn't in any religion of the world. We needed some concept that could be like a North Star or magnetic north, guiding our objectives and our decisions on how to attain any objective or goal. All right, now, what about the tools? Let's look at the tools we have to manage our environment at large. For about 1 million years, we've had the tool of technology. Sticks and stones, then we sharpened the sticks, and we chipped the stones, and we kept developing technology, mostly around weaponry, war and hunting, until I can wear these glasses today, use this computer today, we can fly in planes. It's an artifact of the human mind. So we have the tool of technology with which to affect our environment. About 1 million years ago, we got the tool of fire. We can use it to burn crop residues, forests and grasslands, to hunt, etc. And most of human existence, taking the last 1 million years, we've only had 2 tools, technology and fire. Nothing else. Then a few thousand years ago, we developed the idea of another tool. What about resting the environment to let it recover? Here was a positive tool. Now, you can train in any university in the world, any profession, anything you like. You'll only be trained to use technology, rest, or fire to manage the environment at large. Look at the global climate change and the people that want to combat it. They're looking at one tool, technology. Only one tool. It can't be done. Which I'll point out to you why. So, when we look at cattle or livestock, this is the most condemned thing in many, many ways. UN reports, FAO reports, and when about 40 years ago, 50 years ago, I first said you're going to have to use livestock to reverse desertification, it was as though I'd thrown a pork chop in the synagogue. It caused such a turmoil. I was banned from even setting foot on any campus of any university in Southern Africa for over 20 years because there's such certainty that livestock are causing the problem. So let's look at this. I believe today humanity's entire future hangs on a very slender thread, learning how to manage livestock to address biodiversity loss, desertification, climate change. If we don't do that, we're gone. With all higher life forms, we'll be gone. It hangs on this little thread, and this is the most condemned thing. Let me illustrate why. If we're going to maintain life, biodiversity and life, and prevent climate change, we've got to maintain a cycle of birth, growth, death, and decay. And decay is a living process. Without life, there is no decay. So let's look over billions of years of history. Complex units developed of soils, plants, animals, and they were even more complex in their wholes and how they functioned in wholes. And we were first given this thinking in our Western literature by Smuts, who wrote the book Holism and Evolution in 1926, when he was out of office for 6 months as Prime Minister of South Africa. And he warned us in that book that we scientists would never understand nature, which, bear in mind, is the whole aim of science, to understand nature. He warned us we would never understand it unless we understood it only functions in wholes and patterns. There are no parts, there are no interlinkings, it's wholes and patterns. All right, so let's look at these wholes and patterns that we were warned about in 1926. If we look at the Earth's land surface, always humid, like Ireland, is about 1/3. Seasonally humid and then dry is about 2/3 of the world. So it's a small portion of the world that is like Ireland and humid almost every day. So we'll look at the life cycle of plants and animals. in a humid environment first over 1 year. We'll have volume on the left and time on the going across to the right. So we have a high volume of plant life. When do things die? What time of the year do they die? Well, they can die any month. Tree can die, squirrel can die, whatever. What about the things that ate vegetation? Well, mostly insects. Well, what about the large herbivores? Yes, there were some deer. Yes, there were some okapi and so on. What about the things that ate them? Yes, there were tigers. Yes, there were jaguars. Why weren't there packs of tigers? Because they don't eat insects. Why weren't there packs of jaguars? Because they don't eat insects. They didn't have enough prey. Okay, so what about the decay? Well, microorganism populations are high throughout the year. Decay is rapid, so life continues. So we look at those environments and we say, well, how did you disturb them? The answer is you didn't. For hundreds of years, they could be undisturbed, unless you got volcanic action or a hurricane or something. All right, so rest is natural. It's one of our tools we use, remember? And when we look at that, rest is natural, biological decay is rapid, and we see abandoned cities under vegetation. So no matter how badly we damaged the environment with our agriculture, when we had to abandon these cities, the environment recovered. Okay, let's look at the other parts of the world that are not like that, which is most of the world now that we're looking at. And we've got a seasonal rain period. It can be 50 inches, 80 inches, it can be 10 inches, 5 inches, but vegetation grows. Insects and microorganism populations grow up. But then what happens? The rain stops. The atmosphere dries off, the soil dries off, and now we may have 6, 8, 9 months before there's more rain. Well, what happens to the vegetation? Millions of tons of vegetation dies every single year, and did for billions of years. Okay, so it had to decay and recycle for there to be soil and for there to be life. Well, how did it decay? The microorganism populations also died off. And we never posed that question as scientists. Remember, we're always posing a question, then answering it, and we never asked this question of how did decay occur in 2/3 of the world's land? Because if decay doesn't occur, what takes over is oxidation. And that is a chemical process, and that is gradual with physical weathering. So we're now replacing rapid biological decay with chemical oxidation and physical weathering. That kills grasslands, that leads to deserts forming. So somehow this decay must have occurred. Well, we have to go back to Smuts's thinking of holes. What animals ran here? Very easy to name them. All the large herding herbivores came from these environments. Millions of animals. And the gut of the animal didn't dry off. That's where the moisture remained. And the animals couldn't digest the grass. They're doing it in a symbiotic relationship with microorganisms in the gut. Okay, so that's making sense. I can make sense of that. But then that means that rest is unnatural, because how could the land have rested? It couldn't. You were getting masses of animals coming over it with their hooves, trampling, dunging. How can the land rest? Well, obviously it couldn't. When we look at abandoned civilizations in these environments, we see the land continued to deteriorate. We find them under desert sand. Okay, well then let's try and sort out a few other things. It must have been a terrible world with all those animals because of all the overgrazing. So why wasn't the world overgrazed before humans rescued it by killing off all these animals? There's a good reason. These millions of herbivores had pack hunting predators. And how did they protect themselves from pack hunters? 20 lions in a pack, when most of the females haven't even got horns. And the males don't use their horns to defend females. They use them to fight each other. The answer is 2 strategies to deal with pack hunters. They dropped all their young quickly, because if 1 million animals dropped all their young in a month, and 20% were eaten, 80% survived. If they dropped them every year, none would have survived, every month, sorry. The other thing was large bunched herds. The larger the bunch, the safer they were because the predator can't attack the bunch. You've all seen the wonderful television shows of lions or cheetahs or whatever trying to get the animals out of the herd in Serengeti and so on. Now, bunched animals dung and urinate in very high concentration, but no creatures like to feed on their own feces, including humans. So they had to move off. When could they come back? When the feces had weathered. So that automatically meant plants were exposed to animals for a short time, 2 or 3 days, and then not re-exposed to those until a recovery time. Well, file that in the back of your mind. How did the pack hunters work? They had to isolate an animal to kill it. And then many lions or cheetahs or whatever ate one animal. They didn't say, you protect it, we'll go and kill another. 20 lions would feed on one buffalo. And they're controlled by their prey numbers as predators. So that type of predation, we can see how it worked. But then what happened? Suddenly, we got a new type of animal on the planet, sorry. We're an omnivorous scavenger that learned how to prey. If you think you're a predator, go and try and catch a deer and kill it with your teeth. You can't. We're not a predator. We're an omnivorous scavenger. And we learnt that with language, organization, fire, weapons, swamps, cliffs, we could hunt. And we found it easier to drive a whole herd over a cliff than to get one animal out of the herd. And there are killing sites found where very few animals are eaten. New Zealand, I believe one site, 90,000 moas killed and very few eaten. There are killing sites in the Americas with hundreds of buffalo killed, very few eaten. We didn't have refrigeration and so on. We were omnivorous. It didn't matter if we killed them out. We could turn to another food. So what happened then worldwide? Following the arrival of hunting, scavenging humans, North America lost 74% of the genera to fire and this type of hunting. South America, 79%. Australia, 86% of the genera. Frankly, early Europeans in Africa, Europe, etc., only saw remnants of the former numbers. This was the first enlightening in my life because I started work in the game department in northern Rhodesia, and we had vast herds, 5,000 or more buffalo. Couldn't count them, but they're gone today. But I was only seeing remnants. What did humans replace the role of animals with? Fire. Global climate change began long ago. Now, what about overgrazing? Let's look at it. What is the belief? The belief is it's caused by too many animals. What is the science? André Voisin, a Frenchman, 50 years ago, discovered that overgrazing has got nothing to do with animal numbers. It's got everything to do with how many days the plants are exposed to the animals and how many days of recovery they get before they're re-exposed. Aha, just what we worked out just now the old herds did. Makes sense now. He was published in 5 major European languages, picked up by the Brazilians, the Cubans, the New Zealanders, myself in then Rhodesia, ignored in Britain, ignored in the United States, ignored through most of the world. Not taught yet in any university I know of in the world, 50 years later. There are thousands of PhD dissertations. I've never found one that even defines overgrazing. Why? Because you don't define what you know. Too many animals, why define it? There is no research I can find anywhere that establishes any link between overgrazing of plants and number of animals. If you find it, send it to me. Just a deep belief. So the science is clear, but the myths prevail throughout our educational system, our environmental organizations, our governments, everywhere. Just massive myths. Let's look at fire. It's supported by World Wildlife Fund, Nature Conservancy, universities, governments, international agencies, National Geographic. Everybody supports the use of fire. This statement I picked up a while back: Africa does not produce any significant amount of greenhouse gases, but it is our lakes and rivers that are drying up. America has refused to ratify Kyoto, and it is our lakes that are drying up. This is Professor Nyanganji at Maiduguri in Nigeria. Is he right? Let's look at fire in perspective. Marks and Spencer, a couple of years ago, roughly, announced a £200 million carbon neutral project. They said it would be the equivalent of taking 100,000 cars a year off the road. That's a very laudable effort from Marks and Spencer. What do we have to do in Africa to equal that? All we have to do is stop 12 acres of burning for 15 minutes. On our land, just about a month ago, we lost to poachers. They burnt about 3,000 hectares. Every second, we were doing something like 10 times the damage that Marks and Spencer were trying to overcome with £200 million. We were doing about 5 to 10 times that damage every second. And that's just a small fire. Research shows that a 1.5 acre fire puts out more and more damaging pollutants than 4,000 cars per second. That's French research. In Africa, we burn over 2 billion acres of grassland every year. Why didn't Al Gore mention it in his movie? Why don't any of our best writers who are writing such wonderful stuff about global climate change ever mention the burning of the grasslands of the world? You'll never see a mention.
Sorry, why will the grassland be burned?
Sorry?
I'm ignorant, but why is the grassland burned?
To try to keep the grassland alive. There aren't enough animals to keep it alive. So people burn to keep it alive. Because if you don't and you let it oxidize, it dies. So we replace slow oxidation with rapid oxidation. And we've just got this massive illiteracy, environmental illiteracy, so we don't even mention it. And the grasslands burn every year. We mention the burning of forests over and over and over, but they burn once in 20 years. What about resting rangelands? Remember, we've gone through 2 of our tools now, and it's not looking too good. What is the belief about resting rangelands? If you rest them, they'll recover. It's a deep belief. What is the science? Way back about 70 years ago, the American government needed to shoot 50,000 sheep, Navajo sheep, because they were causing desertification. But they needed evidence, so they put in experimental plots all over the western states. Here's one of them, okay, to prove that if you stopped the overgrazing of plants, you would stop the desertification. I'll read the caption here, in case you can't. Range improvements in the Rio Puerco Valley, Sandoval County, New Mexico. Grass on the left is protected from overgrazing, Soil Conservation Service, and you can see the hill Cabazon on the left. Of course, if you stop overgrazing, plants grow. You didn't need to research that. That's common sense. Just stop cutting your lawn and you'll see it grow. Thank God they left the plots. So we can go back today and study the plots, and they all turn to desert. Grass needs animals. It co-evolved with animals. Here's the International Range Management Society position paper on climate change that I took from their website recently. And the picture on the left's hard to see, so I magnified it there for you. Okay, so the picture on the top is a view of the desert grassland in southern New Mexico. It's had livestock excluded since the 1950s, and as they point out here, but processes resulting in the replacement of grass has continued. Of course it did. If you rest rangelands, they turn to desert. But our belief is the opposite. So we ignore the science. Here's a 70-year-old plot in California, and again, in the absence of any animals, it's turned to desert and algae, and where I've ringed it there, you can see grass, perennial grass plants that died about 70 years ago, and they still haven't broken down, still slowly oxidizing. Here's an atomic site in Idaho where we're doing some work, and all livestock and everything is excluded from this because of the atomic facilities at the background there, and that whole grassland is just oxidizing, turning that dark gray color, showing that biological decay has stopped, and now it's turning to desert. Now, what about total and partial rest? New concepts. Total rest means the removal of large animals, so your land and your plants rest. Partial rest means you've got large animals grazing singly or in small groups without pack hunting predators, so the land and most plants are not adequately disturbed. That's what I've been seeing for the last 3 days all over Ireland. Pastures with 3 head of cattle in them, 5 head of cattle in them, spread all over Ireland, partially resting the land while overgrazing plants. Seems to be a pretty standard practice. It is worldwide, by the way. Research shows us that total and partial rest have about the same effect. So let's look at that briefly. There you get one of the plots in New Mexico, and on the left you have partial rest of the land and overgrazing of grass plants. In other words, animals there too long. On the right you have total rest with no plants overgrazed, but frankly the result is the same, because the biggest influence is the rest. There's plots in Namibia. On the outside of each one is partial rest and overgrazing of plants. On the inside of each one is total rest with no overgrazing of plants, but the result is the same. Now, there was a conference in Colorado in 2000 on the carbon-nitrogen issue, and Lowenroth gave a paper in which he reported very little difference between carbon-nitrogen balance between grazed and ungrazed land. Now, after what we're saying this afternoon, does that make sense to you? You can't graze land. Try it. You can only graze plants. What this is saying is there's very little difference in the carbon in the soil between partial and total rest. That's what we saw there. Partial and total rest. You don't need to research that. You know that there's going to be very little carbon stored in the soil. Now, there's a shot in another rested plot in Yellowstone. Same result. Now, what about the great difference between plants grazed with partial rest and plants grazed with very high animal impact? What would happen there? Well, you don't need to research that. Your common sense tells you that in the foreground you're going to store way more carbon. That's in Montana. In the background you have the standard practice in America of partial rest and overgrazing of plants, same as is being done in Ireland mostly. And in the foreground you have very high impact of animals and no overgrazing of plants, mimicking nature. Sorry?
The key thing is animal manure.
Well, manure is one part of it. It's grazing, it's trampling, it's salivating. Let's look at some more of this, because your point is good. Now, one of the things you'll hear is that climate change is causing desertification, that et cetera, et cetera. No, it's our management that is causing desertification, and desertification is a major component of climate change. So let me show you some evidence on our own land in Africa. Up on the left there, you have a bare area of soil. That has been bare for over 30 years. The road to my home used to be through here. This is a ranch I used to own, and my wife and I donated it for the community, and we run it as a learning site now for the benefit of Africa. Now, that land had been bare like that and eroding for 30 years, regardless of season. So we then subjected it to very high animal impact. We used livestock, and we put them on there for 7 nights in a lion-proof enclosure, because we run the animals in a predator-friendly way. So for 7 nights there was extreme trampling, etc. During the day the animals were grazed on a plan, which they grazed to, and We then had a severe rainfall failure or drought. But look what happened to the land. It started to improve. Then we got a good rainy season, and the land improved further. Then we got another drought, no further treatment, and the land improved even more. Now, do droughts cause land degradation, or does our ignorance? Frankly, it's our ignorance and our fear of animals. Here's another site, bare for over 30 years. You can see, if you look closely there, over 25 centimeters of soil loss eroding from that ground. Now, in the background, you'll see some mats. Those are so that lions can't see into the herd and don't attack the cattle at night. And we will then crowd the cattle onto this again at night. So we did that. And there it is. You can see the mats in the background. You can see the same trees. You see now it's heavily trampled by animals like used to happen in nature. Okay, and then there it is now. It's hard to believe that's the same piece of ground, so you can look at the branch in the tree there and see it's an identical piece of ground. It's amazing how if you just mimic nature, it comes right. We were ignorant about how nature functioned, with our fear of animals. And here's a bare area nearby that we leave bare because the giraffe and the zebra and the guinea fowl and everything need to dust themselves for lice, etc. And this shook the Kruger Park people when they were up looking, because a lot of people are visiting the site now and seeing what we're doing, and they couldn't believe that we're now preserving bare ground. Remnant sites we're preserving for the animals, because they do need them for the social behavior. Just to show it's not just in Zimbabwe, there's a fixed point photograph, prior state up on the left, and then the exact same picture after a few years of mimicking nature with planned grazing, much higher animal numbers. Okay, so let's come back to that decision framework now. We've looked at the tools, and you've seen there's some real glitches in our software in understanding the tools available to us. So we now suggest to people that they work in whole situations, people in the community, the resource base of the community, the money that can be generated, whether it be a family or a nation or a village or whatever, but we work in whole situations because land is unmanageable. It is so tied to the culture and the economy of the people that you have to, it's like me, if I say to you manage the land, it's like me saying to you manage the hydrogen in this water. It's stupid, isn't it? It's equally stupid when I say manage the land. You can't. It's so tied to your culture and your economy, they have to be managed together, as though they were water. So we do that. Then we have that concept of a holistic goal, where we decide, or the people decide, how they want their lives to be, based on what they value most deeply in their culture, their spiritual beliefs, whatever, what they have to produce to live lives like that, and what their environment will have to be like 1,000 years from now for their descendants to be living a similar life. And there's certain rules about forming that, and that becomes magnetic north. You'll never reach it, but it guides all the decisions now to be socially, environmentally, economically in that direction. And then we acknowledge that there are 4 processes on which all human endeavor depends. How water cycles, how nutrients cycle, how solar energy flows through the biological community dynamics. It's like looking in 4 windows to the same room, but when those collapse, please believe me, you have no church, no government, no university, nothing. Every human endeavor depends on those 4 processes. So we bring them to the fore in awareness, in the decision making, and then we have our objectives and our goals and our missions. Nothing wrong with them. We still have them, we still require them, and we still have technology, fire and rest, but we add 2 tools to the tool bag, without which you cannot address climate change. We're going to have to change our attitude. It's simply impossible. And I challenge any scientist to prove me wrong. I'd love it if they would. Then we still have our past experience, research, expert opinion, etc. And then we have 7 filter questions. Remember, we can't count bicycles, motorbikes, and cars. So we have 7 little filter questions we train ourselves to use to quickly check that in achieving the objective that we're trying to achieve, it'll take us with the direction we want to go, and the means to attain it will take us in the direction we want to go. And then we assume we're wrong and we complete a feedback. That modified framework now is working. If I had been speaking to you in the mid-60s, I could have shown you phenomenal pictures of reversing desertification, but equally phenomenal failures. We couldn't get consistent results. 1984, that piece in red fell into place, and from there on, as long as people use this framework, we see desertification reversing, prosperity returning, harmony returning amongst people. Because it's addressing those glitches in the framework we were using. The Carter administration got me to do a lot of training of professional people from American universities and government agencies. We put 2,000 of them through training in how to use this new framework in policy analysis. And this statement was put out by one of those groups after a week of training. And what to me is powerful is that professional people looking at their own government policies could make this statement after just 1 week of training in the new framework. And they said that we now recognize that unsound resource management is universal in the United States. Do you think it's different in Ireland? Please believe me, it's not going to be very different. We've done the same training in India, Africa, everywhere we do the training, officials begin to see this because the framework was faulty, not because we were bad people or stupid or whatever. We had a faulty framework to form policies. Let's look at some results and then pack this up. This is a Wanki community in Zimbabwe, about 145,000 people, living on about 500,000 hectares of good land. They're in perpetual poverty and running out of water. Every year is a drought now, it doesn't matter what the season, and the world is feeding the people. So let's look at that, and we'll look at pictures all taken on the same day. Here the people are coming with Red Cross parcels on the road to Bulawayo from Victoria Falls. These are taken at the end of the rains. This is the best it can be the whole year. The rivers flash flood and are dry. Used to have fish, don't anymore. The boreholes are failing and going dry. And the world is feeding them. Now, the next door, we just came onto our land, which is next door. We've increased the livestock 400%. We've got hundreds more elephant, buffalo, etc. Same day, same weather, same soils. The tool we used, livestock. There is no other tool available to science. This is a story that has hit a lot of people visiting us there. This is a blind we built to watch elephants, so people could photograph elephants as close as this gentleman is to me. You just sat in there in safety. And this is Elephant Pool, where for the hundreds of years the elephants have come to water. There was no water known other than this pool in this river system in the dry season. Okay? That blind is now abandoned. Why is it abandoned? Because we've killed out the elephants? No. We've got more. Just the other day, one of our meetings was late because one chief couldn't arrive because 600 elephants were blocking the road. We haven't abandoned this because of lack of elephants. We've abandoned it because they don't come anymore. Why don't they come? Because this is the water a kilometer above that, where we've never known water for 100 years. We've got water, fish, water lilies. Why? Because we've got more animals now, less fire, and the effectiveness of the rainfall is being felt, reversing desertification. So here we get the two views: biodiversity loss, desertification, climate change, and that's typical of much of America, Australia, Africa, etc., and below, sequestering carbon and water, addressing climate change, biodiversity. And again, I stress, only livestock can do it. There is no technology that can do it. Fire can't, no other tool known to mankind. As I said, humanity's future hangs on this slender thread. And I remind you that I believe sincerely that we need a simple strategy that everybody can understand, that high technology is needed for alternative fuels and a low-tech route to get that carbon back into the soil while reversing desertification, while reversing biodiversity loss, in other words, addressing the other two stool legs of climate change. Why brown revolution? If you saw at the beginning, I said leading the brown revolution. We've had fast food and slow food, and many of you know about it, fast money and slow money. We've had one green revolution that was disastrous. We've got another one taking place that's going to be a bigger disaster. So I'm suggesting a brown revolution. Why a brown revolution? Because it's not about growing plants with high technology. Any fool can grow plants with hydroponics. It's about the soil. It's not about corporate profits. It's about 4 tons of soil going down our rivers for every human alive on the planet today, every year. Who's talking about that? Who's doing something about that? That's our Achilles heel. We need a brown revolution. We need to focus on the soil, get the carbon back in the soil, get the water back in the soil, get the communities sustained again. It's about desertification and climate change, and it's about survival of humanity. I see us as a great David and Goliath situation, frankly. On the one hand, you've got Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, Sir Richard Branson, Monsanto, universities, international agencies, major environmental organizations, corporate agriculture, big money and big myths versus simple science and ordinary people and common sense. Is anything I've said to you today not just been simple common sense? Nothing's been complicated. As I often say to people, if you didn't understand something I said, just join the old ladies in the garden club. They'll teach you this stuff. It's simple common sense, backed by solid science. But who's going to win this David and Goliath battle? The last one, David won. If David doesn't win again, we're in deep trouble. Thank you.